Okay, so welcome to the 10th edition of Leading with Gen AI for business leaders. And joining Pat and Jeff and I is Greg Nieuwenhuys today. Greg, great to have you here. And thanks for agreeing to cover our topic for today, which is really understanding how the private equity sector is looking at Gen AI. And I think we'll broaden that out, I'm sure, for investors in general. We're also going to do our usual thing, which is talk about what's hot and what's been going on in the next few days. And as normal, we'll riff about whatever we feel like as we go through. But Jeff, uh, Jeff and Pat, Greg, who you've obviously had some brief conversations with before, Greg comes from a really interesting background within the big sports brands, chairman of What Bike and also Mammut. And we're also very jealous of your athletic prowess, Greg, I'm sure. But I think what we're really going to be talking about today is your work in helping with change with business leaders around Gen AI. And so please, Greg, let's have you give you a chance to speak and tell us about some of the work you're doing in the private equity sector.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me. I always love a good chat around Gen AI. And yeah, as you said, kind of my background is, I'm currently chairman of two private equity-backed businesses. And before that, I was CEO of three private equity-backed businesses in the consumer space. And I am a mountaineer and I love, running and mountaineering. And I chose to make my career in those spaces. And I've always worked with private equity funds. And it's about 18 months ago, I joined a number of trainings around Gen AI, and I was completely frazzled when I realized what this is going to do to our society, to jobs, to companies. And I was very excited and also very afraid. And then I thought, okay, I need to find a way to be at the forefront of this transformation. And since then, I've been doing a lot of work supporting private equity investors, transform the way they work by implementing Gen AI into their business. And it's super exciting because I get to work with great people on a great topic that obviously, carries a huge amount of interest. But to be honest, also a lot of fear. I mean, there's a lot of fear around Gen AI. And for many people, the initial hurdle to kind of get started and really start changing the way they work is very scary. And therefore, in many instances, it hasn't really happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so kind of when people ask me what I do, I kind of say like my role is to empower business leaders to understand, embrace, and implement Gen AI to transform their business. So that's what I try to do nowadays. Alongside the other companies you mentioned, which I still work for, and where Gen AI is also very active. Yeah.
And is there a set methodology or approach that you take with these businesses? As you say, there's a bit of fear around here. How do you overcome that fear? How do you get these guys started and engaged?
Yes, I mean, we do a lot of work for private equity funds, and we end up doing a lot of work for their portfolio companies, which in the end, covers more of our time because that's where the even bigger value is for them. But we also work for plenty of customers that are not private equity funds. But in general, we always say when speaking to a PE fund, let's start with your investment team and let's educate you. Let's make sure that you understand what Gen AI is, how it works, what it does, what it cannot do. And we'll typically spend, half a day with their full investment team. And in that time, we'll be sharing a lot of theory and explaining them, how these models work, because it's really important to understand how these models works and then to understand actually what is it really good at and what will it not be very good at and how do you add context and all that kind of stuff. But we probably spend close to half the time showing them demos, basically showing them how even the simple access to ChatGPT, which for them a team subscription is $25 a month per license, can really transform the way they work. And so usually after this session, the eyes are open. It's like, oh my God, this is gonna change the work. You often get the jokes of, okay, we don't need any analysts anymore, we don't need any associates anymore, we can all get rid of them. And then we say, well, if you're saying that, you haven't really paid attention, because you need a human in the loop everywhere where you're working, because GenAI is probabilistic and not deterministic. So it can make mistakes, and in most cases, the work of PE funds does not tolerate that. It's not like you're creating images and you just want to seduce a customer. So it's a bit more precise than that. And so in the end, people realize that everyone in that fund is going to have to kind of relearn how to work if they want to become NI enabled. And I think at the end of this kind of first session, they will be definitely very aware that this is obviously very important, which everyone knows nowadays, but they will, I think, now have a much better picture around kind of where to start. And
Greg, sorry to interrupt you there, but it sounds fascinating. What sort of things are they using it for in the PE funds? Presumably, this is for things like assessing deals and due diligence, those kind of things. What sort of use cases?
Yeah. So what I usually do is I speak to the funds. I have a few calls with them before we come and see them to understand their specific way of doing deals and their investment processes, and kind of where they have specific milestones and where they get the investment committee in, and also understand what does an investment memo look like. And it starts from the simple thing is they receive a teaser, and then with the question asked, do you want to pursue this opportunity? And if so, please sign the NDA. And now usually the NDA, they'll go and either go to their internal lawyer, or they'll send it to their lawyers, or they'll spend loads of times reviewing the NDA. And we'll build them a very simple tool that will basically review the NDA, tell them that according to their standards, articles 3, 4, and 5 need a bit of precisioning on these points. It'll draft an email automatically back saying, we're fine with this NDA. However, can you make these changes? Blah, blah, blah. And there you go. So that's the kind of this is at the totally beginning of the investment phase. Well, obviously you have the research and all that before that, and the sourcing. But that's an example, which is a very simple example. But it also has a huge impact in kind of deal sourcing, where they're analyzing markets, they're trying to understand trends, trying to do competitive analysis, where, for example, a tool like Perplexity is very, very good for that type of work, often in combination with LLMs like ChatGPT-4 or Claude, but also very much so across the due diligence phase, whether it's about summarizing reports, or whether it's about us creating custom GPTs that contain the financial due diligence, the tax, kind of all the different due diligences, and then which will automatically create an investment memorandum for them, for example.
Yeah,
and that's never going to be 100% accurate.
So, I want to jump in on this. There's one thing that comes straight to mind for me is like, I get it. I don't know if you're not aware, but I work as a venture partner as well, and I get a lot of decks through and investor memorandums, and sure, I go through the NDAs, and I can see the use of the tools. And Jeff always uses the expression that we've drunk the Kool-Aid. But however, I'm also fearful because I'm using ChatGPT 4.0. It's not private. I'm really careful about what I put in there. I do really generic stuff. So I've never put in a legal document for a client, or even a teaser or anything like that. What I'll do is I'll maybe do things like specific competitor research. So I might ask about a particular industry sector, or I might say, who are the competitors to XYZ, not putting anything proprietary or anything that could be seen as IP. So how do what's your thoughts about that? How do you overcome the privacy concerns?
Do you pay for your ChatGPT license?
Yeah.
So we kind of, our recommendation for our clients is and some prefer to use Microsoft Copilot or Claude, but when we can influence it, we say the go-to is ChatGPT 4, a license with OpenAI and a Teams license. And basically that Teams license, the servers are based in Ireland, so they're in Europe. So there's no GDPR issue. And obviously OpenAI has a very strong claim that they will not use that data for training purposes. Now, you can always ask yourself the question, what does that mean that they say that? You know, I would say almost every single PE fund that we work with uses Microsoft and Azure, and they trust the Microsoft data policies. And in fact, those of OpenAI are not very different. But that's a discussion around risk. I mean, obviously, the US government will not be satisfied with the privacy policies of OpenAI or Microsoft. But most, I would say most or all of the PE funds that we work with are, and that's also our pragmatic recommendation, because I guess there is always a risk. And OpenAI is not yet what Microsoft is, but I believe that the bigger risk is not to use it at all.
Yeah, and I suspect the companies that are looking to get the potential investment, for example, do you ask them permission? If they say no and you're not going to go forward and reviewing their deal, they'll probably say, do what you can to review our information, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we work for our private equity funds, we are asked to sign NDAs as well, right? So we have our own kind of NDA reviewer, etc. But we always add a clause to say, look, yes, but just to be 100% clear, in order to do our work for you, we need to be able to upload these, some of your documents into generative AI tools like ChatGPT-4, which we will guarantee you we only use tools. We'll say which ones they are, and obviously that they guarantee, or that they say that they won't use the data for training purposes. And in quite a lot of cases with our customers and PE funds, we also help them create what is an AI policy, so they can actually tackle some of these questions for themselves. Because as soon as you kind of expose the organization to generative AI, you also expose it to new risks that the company may not have faced before or thought about. But the reality is that even if you don't kind of officially expose your colleagues to Gen AI, the reality is the majority of the people will already be using it anyways on their personal account, which is most likely not paid, and that's a much higher risk.
So I like this in terms of the NDAs will normally cover how you might need to process the information, share the information with trusted parties, etc. But actually to take that further and specifically talk about the GenAI tools that you would be using, I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
I mean, and to be honest, not all of our clients take that. I don't think they've changed all their processes to say for every NDA they go into to make that caveat. But we've teamed up with quite a few to say, look, let us help you create this AI policy. Typically they want to get lawyers involved as well, which we strongly recommend.
Yeah.
But we try to get something that is, legally robust and pragmatic. And I think striking that balance is very important, because as everyone knows, this is moving so fast.
So on the upside, Greg, are you seeing strong metrics in terms of how long it's taking you to do due diligence in a shorter period of time, etc.? Is there some evidence of how well that's working for you?
Yes, I mean, I think we've seen. It's not like we track this at all our customers, so I can't give you like a scientific answer to the question.
Yeah.
But I think we've seen this work extremely well, where you can take tasks that could take typically 2 or 3 hours done within 5 minutes, and you could take tasks that over a period of a month's time would take 20, 30, 40, 50 man hours, which might be reduced to 10. So in some cases it's really huge. And I think this is the misconception, is people always kind of ask, okay, what is the golden nugget use case that I need to implement for my company first? Let's do that one. And that's just not how it works. That's really not how it works. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions and that's what kind of our work is we empower organizations to become AI enabled themselves. And it's just like today, you cannot imagine a business operating without internet connection, because everyone is connected online all day, every day. The same is going to be true around AI. And so our job first is to make sure that organization and everyone in that company is AI enabled and understands what the models do and knows how to talk with all these amazing models. And once you've established that foundation, you can then start to think around, okay, where are we going to invest money? Where might we build proprietary tools that are specific to us, that are good for us to generate even more value? But you have to start to learn to walk before you run. And I think that's the most important part is people like, I want to now, outsource all of my customer service, but they've never really interacted with a chatbot, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's something that Ethan Mollick says, isn't there, around you just need to use the tool for about 10 hours, and he reckons that's the sort of tipping point, isn't it? You do 10 hours with something like a ChatGPT, and then you'll learn and understand how it works. What's your thoughts, Greg, on some of these the latest direction of travel towards this kind of things like shared canvases? I'm sure things like Notebook LM actually as well, where rather than what we've seen at ChatGPT and those kind of assistant tools since launch has been very much a sort of single prompt or set of prompts, isn't it, and follow-ups and that kind of stuff. Whereas now we're moving into this kind of next phase where you can aggregate lots of information together and have lots of people starting to contribute on that. I guess there's two parts of that. There's that kind of Notebook LM side of things, which I think is really interesting, isn't it? Where you could put all the information together about a sector and the pitch deck and all of those kind of things and get it to summarize all of that for you and maybe the fund priorities and objectives and those kind of things. And perhaps start to generate, a mini podcast for the stakeholders in the fund to then use that as a way to understand perhaps what the pitch is. But also you've mentioned ChatGPT Teams a couple of times there. Is that kind of shared canvas and shared prompts and that kind of thing? What's your thoughts around that with teams of people using the same sort of session, if you like, in a tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I would say that if you kind of think around, Claude and ChatGPT, for example, the two leading LLM models at the moment, my view is that kind of what they do on the back end is incredible what they're capable of. I find the front end still pretty frustrating. Kind of the US experience is not great, and even ChatGPT, like sometimes copying and pasting text, it'll recognize it as an image, and I mean it's just like, and it's kind of all these small things that are that irritate me a lot. So I think there's a huge upside without even improving the quality of the LLM itself to get a huge amount more out of the capability of models by improving the UX. And I think the canvas that was launched 2 weeks ago is a good example. I mean, I've used it a little bit myself. And I think when you're working with more complex documents, it's of course exactly what you want to do, because you don't want to have to rerun the prompt and kind of to redo the whole document that you're working on, and then just kind of a black box of where did it make changes, where did it not. So I think that is a good example, and I expect that we're going to see much more kind of these advancements alongside, the awaitment for everyone around ChatGPT 5. Is the truth is that even without improving the LLM behind it, the capabilities and the UX of the model can be hugely improved, and maybe that'll make an even bigger difference in the short term. And kind of that's to your point around the ChatGPT. One of the things we'll typically do for our clients is we will build them a prompt library full of custom GPTs that are very specific to their processes, their templates, their ways of working. And the main reason why is because we've seen that if we don't do this, after we've worked with our clients, you'll have, the young people will spend time and they'll spend their weekends trying stuff out. But the more senior people are just not very patient, and they don't really understand how to prompt yet. And they'll ask a few bad prompts, get a few bad outputs. They'll try again twice. And then the output's going to be crap. And they'll think, this is just all rubbish. It doesn't work. And they won't try again. So we really have to kind of take all those barriers of changing habits to make it as easy as possible for them to see market research. And then market research, you just put in the name of the company. It's an amazing prompt. It'll do the work and it'll spit it out in their format. Then they see like, oh, wow, this is really good. I want to use this again. And then they'll try a few other prompts. And that's kind of how you can get to change people's habits, because these people are always busy, they work 12 hours a day, maybe more, and they've especially the senior people have been doing the same thing for many, many years, and it's just tough to break those habits. We're humans.
Yeah, for sure. No,
We're not
makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. No, makes perfect sense. No, all good stuff. Just wanted to ask you about the use of Gen AI in the portcos as well, because this has got to be a huge thing. So, I mean, it's really interesting to hear all about how the funds can use it themselves. But one of the things that struck me, I did a lot of work with startups, and the amount of times I've seen things like pitch decks where people are saying, look, we need to raise $1 million, we're going to do this, and the team size is going to be X. And you look at it, and I always ask them the question, okay, do you need that many developers? Do you need that many marketing people? And have you thought about how generative AI can completely change the model of your business? What's your sort of thinking about that when you look at an investment case, for example, in a portco, as to how that business could be transformed, how those numbers could fundamentally be changed by bringing in Gen AI?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's obviously going to be very different for the portfolio companies that we work with, which are typically, companies with like between 10 and 100 million EBITDA, than for a startup, because for a startup, you basically have a clean sheet of paper and you can design your organization to be completely Gen AI enabled. And in fact, my business partner at Generative AI Strategy, he's built a business. They sell puzzles online, and 95% of the business was built with Gen AI in terms of content creation, building the website, building the contract with suppliers. All of that was done with AI. When you come into portfolio companies, again, here we start by spending time with the leadership team, helping them understand what it is, opening their eyes, creating a sense of urgency. And then they're like, ooh, aha, wow, this is huge. We need to start moving on this. And we really lean on them to say, look, you need to appoint some people in the organization who are going to be super users, project leads. You need real advocates internally who are going to carry this and work with us to make it happen. And I mean, there's going to be 100 potential use cases that they could start implementing. We tell them, let's work on a few that are going to be very quick. So we want to create momentum. We want to create use cases that are visible to the people who work in the company, and ideally that have a positive impact for the customer or the product, but not about cost saving, because we want to create enthusiasm and momentum around Gen AI. So yeah, that's where we usually start. And then kind of when you have that enabled, you have a much stronger base to then look at, okay, what are kind of the really big ticket use cases that we could start working on. And maybe you'll think around, a time to implement of not a month, but 3 months and 6 months, or maybe even a year. But people have a lot more confidence in their ability to achieve those things if they've already had a few quick wins.
Yeah. And do you think from a PE perspective, you would look at a company when you're assessing the deals and say, okay, we look at this company, I completely agree with your point here. You never want to bring Gen AI in as something where you're going to say, look, we can reduce headcount because it scares the life out of the employees and going to cause you all sorts of problems. But do you think either now or in the near future that PE firms will be looking at investments and saying, okay, if we take this business and there's certain types of business this is better suited to, we're going to look at this business and say, okay, their projection is to do revenue of this based on the data they've given us, but actually we think because of the way they could deploy Gen AI with the same size team using Gen AI, the revenue EBITDA goes like this. Do you think is PE starting to look at that already, and so do you think they will be in the near future?
Yeah, so when we start working with a new PE client, I think probably in the majority of the cases the answer is no. But after we've had our first interaction with them, the answer is yes. Right. So I mean, the shift is very quick. And PE investors are masters at kind of looking at a business, looking at an industry, thinking this is what it is now, what could it be 5 years from now, and kind of layering on that question of, okay, what is generative AI? What does generative AI mean for the company? Is obviously extremely important, and it could be a huge opportunity in terms of seeing, how to grow the company and make it more efficient and take costs out and all that. But it can also be a huge risk in terms of, this industry is going to be much more susceptible to disruption by new entrants. So that's typically a question that we look at. The other side that we encourage them to look at is how ready is the management team to deal with this? So do they, are they open to the topic? Have they formulated a vision around what generative AI means for their business and what it means to them and how they're going to make this part of who they are? And I think in some cases, the answer to both questions have led to, well, let's not make this investment, or let's definitely go ahead and push harder and go forward with it.
Greg,
sorry, go, Rob, go.
Yeah.
Go, Rob. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, as you're saying, how ready is this company in terms of embracing GenAI, but also is GenAI helping that company ready to actually work with a private equity firm as well? Because it's going to bring new challenges for them in terms of how they report back to the investors, etc. So does it actually help you open up to the clients to be more responsive to work with a private equity firm?
You mean the clients as in the portfolio companies?
As in the portfolio company, exactly. Because I think, isn't there going to be some portfolio companies that will be resistant to work with a private equity firm? Because it's going to bring maybe some new reporting restrictions or work to do.
Yeah, I'd say, it's a good question. I think in most cases, when there's a leverage buyout by a PE fund, I would say the management team is usually very excited to partner up with the PE fund, and I think in a lot of cases they'll have a good say and whether they'll have a vote and they can help decide whether that happens or not. So I think in most cases there will be strong openness. Sometimes there might be skepticism and concern. To me, that's usually a sign of weakness, by the way. And I think also yes, I think GenAI can create more openness, but I don't think it happens overnight. I'm not sure that people kind of really see it in that way. But generally, I think if people are more concerned around, more openness, to me, that's always a sign of weakness. That means you have something to hide.
And maybe more on a practical side is that you're able to go in and give them tools to make it easy for them to continue to work with you. And
Yes. And most private equity investors, to be honest, are relatively, they understand that they're not the managers of the company, so they don't step on their toes as long as things are going well. And I think it's in everyone's interest for that to stay that way.
Yeah. Hey, I think Pat had a question.
Really, really interesting insights. Thanks, Greg. So I was actually working for an SME. I was in a leadership team of an SME that was bought out by private equity just as ChatGPT was kind of kicking off. That was a kind of interesting experience. But since I've moved on, I've been working with a few private equity companies, running workshops with them. And there's kind of 4 main areas of discussion that have come out of that. And the first one was around how those private equity organizations can really make sure that existing portfolio companies are taking advantage, or at least on the pulse of what's possible now with generative AI, but also what's coming along. So are they continuously looking at that? And how does all of that value roll up to the PE portfolio? And the second one was, the amount of time it takes for a PE company to actually make an investment in a new organization can be quite long. It can happen shorter, but say we're talking 6 to 9 months to make an investment in a new organization. A lot can happen in terms of the exponential growth of generative AI. So that can actually shift the valuation or change the valuation of the potential acquisition, either positively or negatively, or impact the whole market as well. So there's that one. There's the second one. The third one was really around, does generative AI now allow potential targets to actually scale their business without such a great or even a private equity investment at all? So can they go alone? And does that give them more leverage in negotiations with the with the private equity company. And the final one, so the fourth one rather, was how does the private equity business use generative AI to actually improve its own operations as well? So those are kind of the four common themes that have come up from about 5 or 6 workshops I've run in the Nordics and the UK.
Sounds like we're going to need to record a new podcast here to answer those 4 questions.
Yeah,
but let me try and answer. I think to your first question, I mean, we spoke a bit about the how are they leveraging generative AI. I think there is a lot around efficiency. I think we had some examples of just how can you get your people to be much more efficient, spend more time, much less time doing repetitive tasks. And that basically means that they can look at more deals and be more selective. There is also a point around effectivity, where basically, if you set this up well, you will have, these PE managers are all very, very intelligent people, but there are a lot of repetitive tasks to be done to make a deal happen. And a lot of that work can be, semi-automated by GenAI, which means that you can help your team spend more time thinking, less time doing. So that should allow not only to be more efficient, but also to take better investment decisions. And obviously the third pillar really is around kind of how do you empower your portfolio companies to embrace generative AI themselves and to make sure that they are ready and that they have the right understanding and that they kind of, have the right playbook in order to make it happen. I think those are kind of the 3 big buckets. In terms of your point around access to cash, I don't think that generative AI yet has had a significant impact on how companies access cash. And, it's been quite difficult anyways in the last few years because of high interest rates. Whether it's the debt markets, but also raising equity has been much tougher. So I don't think that has changed yet. And if I'm honest, I don't think it's going to change overnight either. So those are the questions 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. I actually had one other thing. I saw an article the other day about the number of private equity-backed companies in the UK. And Jeff, you probably know more about this than me, but there was a huge number of the SME market in the UK is backed up by private equity. And I just wondered speculating what kind of possibilities there are there in terms of generative AI and the economic implications.
In terms of what? In terms of the value that they can create, or additional value they can create by using
in terms of both actually.
Yeah, well, I should imagine it's huge. Go on, Greg. Go. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I think an interesting point is that with what we have now with GenAI, we've never ever had these kind of amazing technologies be democratized so quickly. So they're accessible to everyone now. You don't need to invest millions in order to have great technology. And even if you want to adopt GenAI at scale, it can be done relatively cheaply now. And I think that puts the SME at a huge advantage because they don't have these significant investments that they need to make upfront. And in most cases, they will be more nimble. Right. And I think nimble and agile agile is not a great word because it's been used for so many different things. But being able to be flexible, I think, is probably one of the most important success factors of being good with generative AI. Because, it's come across a few times in this call, but it's like less than 2 years ago, ChatGPT was launched. And it's literally gotten 10 times better. And as humankind, we have never seen that pace of change happen before. We don't know how to cope with it. But I think those organizations that are flexible and empower their people, to make mistakes, to learn, to experiment, to use the tools, to be open about it, to incentivize the use of GenAI, will be much faster in adopting them successfully than some of the much bigger companies who are more preoccupied by risks and have more to lose. So I do think we might, from that point of view, there might be a rebalancing towards the SME where, for small and medium companies, there's potentially quicker value on the table than for large organizations.
I think, Pat, you gave us some nice structure with your 4 points, and Greg, great answers for that as well. And I think that, as you said, we delved into some of them a bit more than others today, but I think that's a really good insight in what's going on in private equity. And Jeff, your last point in terms of, the amount of companies that are involved with private equity firms now, I mean, that's not going to change. People will still want to have management buyouts and succession plans and all those sort of things. And GenAI is not going to solve all of the needs for cash. Yeah, there's still going to be heavy capex and opex and things that needs to be taken care of. I think this leads nicely on to, as you were saying, Greg, a lot of new things in the last 2 years. So one of our little segues that we have in here then is what's hot and what's new and what's going on. And Jeff, I think you wanted to mention some Claude updates.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the hot thing as we record this, isn't it? And Greg, I saw you post about this yesterday as well. So Claude's, it's an experimental feature that they've demoed, where it's computer takeover. So if you go and watch the video, we'll put it in the show notes as a link to it. It's a brilliant thing to watch. So it's the head of developer relations at Anthropic, demos how he sets Claude off with a task, and what it does is it basically takes over his computer, moves the mouse around the screen, clicks on things, brings up browsers, and builds a website, and then customizes the website and everything. And it's a fantastic demonstration of this kind of thing. Where it's going, and I think when you sort of take a step back and look at the wider market here, it was always really interesting. There's OpenAI back in June 2024 bought Multi, which is this technology that allows you to take over screens and all that kind of stuff. So this is a sort of direction of travel. And then you look at Microsoft Copilot, where they had that, or the recall feature, which caused all sorts of privacy issues that they put in, where it was basically watching everything you were doing and building up a picture from there. And then in Copilot, some of the latest updates is Copilot Vision, where it's better at looking at things on the screen. And I was sort of thinking through with this as well. I've been doing some work in Power Automate over the last few weeks, the Microsoft tool, which neatly segues into Copilot and AI models and those kind of things. And it's it's a low code automation tool, but it's some really powerful stuff you can do in there using things like regular expressions to parse text and all of this kind of stuff. So I had to go and put my old developer head back on, from my old techie head from years ago. And of course, anyone who's ever done regular expressions, it's they're quite detailed. But tell you what, ChatGPT is absolutely brilliant at writing all that stuff. And one of the things I found with it as well was you could just do it so much quicker than I would be able to do it. I could probably hand crank them out. It'd take me ages. But every so often, it would come up with error messages. And what I was doing was just screen grabbing the Power Automate screen with the error message on, paste it to ChatGPT and go, yeah, I did what you said, and this is what happened. And then it parses the whole screen and then says, okay, we'll do this. And I got a sense as I was doing this of almost like pair programming with ChatGPT. And I think this is where this kind of Claude feature goes, is into this kind of pair programming type thing, or you've got somebody working with you, or you're writing a PowerPoint and you've got a marketing expert helping you do the formatting and copywriting and all of this kind of stuff that's in there. So I think this is going to come through really, really quickly. All of the tools will have this kind of feature that'll be in there, and we'll just think this is perfectly normal. It's going to help us. It's going to click on things on the screen and write text for us, and we'll have that combined experience, us plus the AI. But what do you guys reckon?
Jeff, is this the end of the laptop and the desktop? Is this the thin end of the wedge, mate?
Interesting, isn't it? It could be. I mean, you imagine that. Yeah, you might not need it. You could just observe what it's doing from your mobile, on the screen there, isn't it? And see what it's doing. And you know this thing about how, if you do one of those chatbot experiences with a customer services center, it tends to be an offshore customer services center where there's an agent who's got 20, maybe I'm exaggerating here, but 10 or 20 chatbot sessions they're having. That's why you always get that delay in there, because they're actually speaking to multiple people at the same time. Maybe as we go into this agentic world, you're going to have one senior developer who's going to be monitoring multiple Claude sessions or whatever, as it's going through, doing little software development tasks. You've got one senior who's sat over the top of sort of 4 or 5 Claudes, monitoring what they're doing, tasking them, and that kind of stuff.
So, that's a great example of a new tool. But going back on some of the stuff that Greg was talking about in terms of education, I just want to bring up something in terms of what's new around education at the moment as well. I spent the day yesterday at the AI Finland Gala, and there was something like 10 different categories. I'm not going to go into all of those today. We're going to do that on another podcast, and we're going to get the leader of that initiative to come and do a podcast for this, hopefully in the near future. But one thing I liked on the education is the Helsinki University led elements of AI. And their goal was to educate 1% of the population in Finland on GenAI. And that's not just about the fundamentals of GenAI, but also ethical implications even. But the industry applications, I really like the fact that they also had the industry applications. So whether that's media, healthcare, education, whatever it might be. So I think that's really good. And for a knowledge-based economy to be taking that initiative here. And when it comes to education, you guys were talking about, is that death the laptop or mobile or something? There's still books out there. And Pat, do you have anything to say about books out there?
Thanks for the plug, mate. Thanks for the plug. The check's in the post.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon Kindle now.
So we'll put a link for Jeff's for Pat's new book when we put the podcast out, so you can go through and have a look there. And I think it's an extortionately high price. How much was it, Pat?
I'll send you the PDF, so shut up.
Yeah. Great. So are there any sort of final questions for Greg, or any comments anyone wants to make?
No, I'm good.
Really great insights.
Yeah, really. Yeah, really useful. And it's really interesting to hear how, in a particular sort of, I love understanding how different sectors and segments are using these kind of tools. So, Greg, it's been great to hear all of that stuff in the PE world.
So, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, Greg, then thank you. Really good to have you here today. And I think this will wrap up our 10th podcast with Leading with GenAI. And as usual, we'll try and put some decent links on here. And we're always happy to receive suggestions for other podcast topics and questions that we'll endeavor to answer. So thank you.
Cheers, Greg. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.